everyone in this sort of IDW space had their own breaking point originally. I guess for you, that would be your experiences at Evergreen. I was reflecting on that this morning, and I wanted to ask you at the time, even though you knew you were doing something that was right, what doubts, what worries went through your mind? Because when you make a decision like that, it obviously comes with its risks. Was it a case of just reminding yourself that you were doing, ultimately the right thing, or were you sort of clouded in worry and doubt as well?
Well, I think I am unusually well constructed for such a situation. So there's a way in which I look back on what happened, and there are little things I would do differently, I suppose. But in general, my feeling is I didn't have any choice.
Hmm.
The right and wrong aspect of it was crystal clear. The what needed to be said was crystal clear. My biggest concern at the time was that there was the narrative as it unfolded as people saw it, but there was also a meta game being played, right? The idea at the Evergreen campus was if we can keep this story local, then we have sufficient control to win. That's what the opponents of reason were thinking or were effectively thinking. And so, from my perspective, it had to be viewed by a wider audience that could see how crazy the whole thing was. That was the thing that made it impossible for them to retain control of it. Now, on the one hand, the mainstream press played along, not understanding what it was doing, presumably, but played along with the desire to keep the story local. They absolutely wouldn't touch it. Tucker Carlson was interested in the story. At first, I thought that was completely cynical. That he was a conservative, and the story made liberals look bad. From my perspective, the story needed to reach a wider audience, and so I was willing to go on his program. I also went on Joe Rogan's program. He's obviously a liberal. He was not trying to exploit liberal craziness, but nonetheless, I later came to understand that Carlson was up to something much more interesting than just embarrassing liberals. Right? I don't even think that's what he was doing. But nonetheless, the point is, I was concerned that the story would not leap the gap and get viewed by people who would be properly shocked by it. The protesters themselves, the protesters who inside of hours became rioters, they actually made it possible to get a wider audience interested because they proudly filmed everything they did and uploaded it, I think, to Facebook, and then another person moved it to YouTube where it was widely viewed. And that error allowed me to tell the story and not have people imagine that I was just simply making it up, right? Because it was all there on video. And I would say it was also quite possible for people to get the story wrong, even if they were fascinated by it. And the work of Benjamin Boyce and Mike Nana has made that impossible because Benjamin Boyce has done an absolutely thorough job prying the evidence loose, finding every scrap of video, compiling it, getting documents, and doing an extensive video series. And Mike Nana has done a much shorter, more to the point video series that really captures what it felt like at the time and what it meant. So anyway, I'm grateful in retrospect that the thing did not result in it being impossible for me to teach there, but not being able to jump the gap to do anything else.
Hmm. And I mean, obviously, since then you've gone on to have success in a whole new way. But back then, where it was impossible to predict where your career was going to end up, were you worried at all about what you might do next or what the next venture was? Because obviously you weren't guaranteed success in this podcast space with the book, with everything else that's come with it since.
Sure. I mean, I think I would have been foolish not to be worried. But again, the silver lining of the whole thing was that it was so clear it didn't really matter whether or not there was a path to the next thing. There was no way literally, for me, there is no way I could have remained silent given what was taking place on a campus that I loved, what was jeopardizing students that I cared deeply about, right? There was no way I was going to be able to live with myself if I didn't say what needed to be said. And because I had been studying related questions for decades, I also knew what it was that did need to be said, right? So it wasn't like I had to sort my way through some incredibly confusing philosophical landscape in order to come up with responses. It was like, no, here's why what you're saying is wrong. Here's what will happen if you keep going down this road. So the silver lining was it was actually straightforward from my perspective, even as hard as that is to believe looking at it from the outside.